Good morning. I'm Deacon Rufus L. Hudgens Jr. from the Lago Baptist Church Sunday School this morning. And this morning, we are going to talk about, for the lesson, incorruptible leaders. Now, even today, we can all relate to those leaders. We're talking about incorruptible and corruptible. And, we had 4 years of really a lot of corruption in our politics. So, just to give you a little bit of a background before we get into the main part of the lesson, we're going to kind of ease up into the lesson. Now, people sometimes they distort justice. We as black people, we say we don't get any justice. It's just us and not justice itself. Now, what actions can we take to prevent manipulations of justice? There's a whole lot of manipulating going on even today. And they went back there. Of course, they didn't call it politics back in that day, but it's the same. Now, in Deuteronomy, which our lesson is coming from, judges, officials, and priests work together to administer justice for God's people. You see, justice it's based on the standards of God, and leaders must live by the same rules that others are required to live by. It ain't just for one person.
Sure.
We kept hearing all during the election and stuff, no one is above the law. And if our Constitution holds, that will be the reigning statement that no one, not even the presidents, are above the law. And we talking about laws and corruption and incorruptibility. Our lesson today is taken from Deuteronomy, in which Moses reviewed the law that was first given at Mount Sinai. Now, more than a repeating of the law, it tells us that Moses included explanations of how the law would be applied when the Israelites lived in the new land. If we're coming into a new place, the first thing we need to find out about the laws, what you can and can't do, right? So as they was coming to this new land, the Israelites, it says our lesson teaches us that justice is possible if the standards of God are followed. Man's law is good while we are here, but God's law is forever. You will have to deal with it here and when you die. Our lesson also shows us that justice must be consistent and applicable to all people, including the judges. They are not exempt, but we see today, right now, things going on in the Supreme Court. All right? Can I get an amen? Y'all, if y'all watch the news, you see what's happening. Voters' rights, abortion rights. They seem to be trying to turn back the hands of time and going back to the old rules that only we have the power.
Mhm.
But I got some news for them.
Mhm.
They don't have no power.
Right.
Only God has the power. Now, you know, and you've heard this, there's a saying that it takes a village, right, to raise a child.
Right.
Now, this old saying suggests that raising a child in a community is a big endeavor.
Mhm.
Everybody got to participate. I can recall coming up in Marion. Everybody in that community knew who you were. Huh?
Mhm.
And if you got into trouble, they knew who you were.
Mhm.
And they would tell the parents.
Mhm.
And it was a close-knit type of community that everybody looked out for each other.
Yeah.
Now, the same principle holds true with regards to creating a just society. We can't have a society that's unequal. But right now, that's what it looks like.
Mhm.
Now, in our lesson, we will discover that the need for all hands on deck when building a just society. Everybody got to participate. People can't do it by themselves. And I don't care what you say about nobody helped me, that I did everything on my own to get where I'm at. The words of Supreme Court Justice Thomas said nobody helped him. I can recall there has been a lot of people that has helped me in my life. So our lesson today is that God gives Israel a step-by-step way of establishing justice. Now, history has shown us that often there are small groups of people who are working for a just society. And then there's another group of people that's working against it, right? So for justice to truly take root within a society, it calls for a turn toward morality. If you don't have no morals and don't care about nothing, you are going straight to hell. Next, we talk about leadership in our society. You see, leaders is a God thing, huh? All throughout the Bible, He has appointed leaders, right? Moses, Joshua, Abraham, to name a few. In our lesson, it calls for professional leaders. Even today, they are supposed to be professionals. They are professional leaders who will be dedicated to this work by trade. Now, y'all listen at me. They are to know the people. Therefore, each is appointed from a tribe. Now, we talking about Israel. Of every tribe to ensure that all people are fairly accounted for. You know, they had all them tribes, right? And each one spoke a different language, did they not? But they understood each other and they looked out and accounted for each other. Now, this suggests to us that even in our modern society today, that if we are to hope for justice, we will need to have leaders who specialize in the local affairs and the local people at the helm of leadership. You know, if you're not out there with the people and you don't know what's really going on in the community and you just talking words, trying to get their vote for the next election, then you're not a leader. A leader is one who has been a follower. We know that in the military, brother Walker. You can't just jump out there and say, I'm gonna lead y'all. You got to have a little bit of experience, right? In order to do the job. Now, as we look at our lesson, we see Moses prepared the Israelites to take the land that God had promised them, right? He gave them the book of Deuteronomy. Now, the second, which is referred to as the second law, with reinterpretations to meet the needs of the present generation. Now, Moses, he warned them of the temptations they would encounter in the new land. Now, that's being prepared, trying to get your people prepared. Their faithfulness to the Lord and the covenant was required of them if the Lord was to protect the land and provide for his people. The teachings of the law was to be consistent throughout all generations, and their obedience to the law would prove to be a witness to the nations that the God of Israel was great. Moses trying to make his point.
All right.
He said, you got to be obedient for one thing. And then as we provide these laws, we have to abide by the laws. Our lesson is focused on the need for judges and other officials of authority. You know, we just looking at all of this back then and look at us today. Same thing. Just like this comedian had said about this guy that he had this parrot, right? And this parrot stayed with him on his shoulder all the time. So the guy went into this bar. So the parrot says, people. So the guy told the parrot, those are people in the bar. So the next Sunday, the man went to church, and the parrot was on his shoulder. He told the guy, he says, people. And the guy told him, say, parrot, these are people in the church. So the parrot said, same people. That was in the bar. So as we continue, we see as the Israelites were preparing to take possession of the land, the Lord had promised to give them. Moses gave them commandments to follow. We all know about the 10 Commandments, right? So these commandments exhorted them to revere the Lord. Now, they were to make spiritual choices based on their personal knowledge of God. You can't just come out there and start trying to quote the Bible. You don't know what you're talking about. That's why it says to read the Bible to show yourself approved. They were not to make alliances with people of the land because they would begin to worship and serve foreign gods. They didn't want them to get into that old deal of serving idol gods, right? So you see, to worship other gods would mean that people would think more of that idol god than they did of the Lord. And he didn't want that to happen, so he told them, said, don't start looking at what they saying that their little gods can do. Now the Israelites were to appoint judges in all of their towns. Now, when Israel entered into the new land, they were allotted land according to their tribes. Now, each tribe was to be governed by land officials. Here's where the corruption starts, right? Although each tribe would have their local leader and officials, all were required to be governed by the law and the covenant given to them by our God. Now, local leaders and other officials were to reflect God in the same manner. Okay? If you're not God fearing, how can you preach to somebody else and try to tell them what they're supposed to do? I said, right then and there, they gonna say, well, you're not doing it.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times when I get into conversation with people and they'll say, well, what about you? I say, I'm not talking about me. We're talking about you right now.
Yeah.
When we start talking about me, then you can say whatever you need to say, what I'm not doing. So, again, as we continue on, we see our text is also retelling of Exodus 23. Now, in Exodus, the emphasis was on the requirements that had to be met if there were to be justice in this new land, right? Also in Deuteronomy, the emphasis was on the leaders and the officials. Now, since the requirements for the people and the leaders were basically the same, it would be safe to conclude that those selected to be judges and other officials should already have demonstrated the knowledge of the law and the character that was needed to execute justice. When you look at those books in the Bible, we can look at Timothy about what it took to be a man of God, to be a deacon, to be a preacher. You have to be a man of good report, right? You can't just jump out there and say, I want to be a deacon. You every Saturday night you're in there in the bar and drinking and messing with the women, even though you're married. And you come back on Sunday morning and say, I want to be a deacon, and people know that you're doing these things. You have not ready. You're not ready. For a long time, when Reverend Rogers asked me to be a deacon, I kind of ran from doing that because I told myself, I got too many skeletons in my closet. You know, a lot of us got skeletons, but he told me, you ain't gonna never be perfect. There's none perfect other than Jesus Christ. So as we conclude our lesson, it describes a diverse society. And that's what we have now. We got people of many colors. It's not just the old white man that's always saying what needs to be done and that they have the right. You got to have a diversified society, one that is centered around justice. Now, each part of our society has its own specific function and in the field of justice. Also, the priests, even back then, are commanded to do as God says, not as man says, but as God says, as were the people in Israel as a whole. Our lesson makes it clear that everyone has a role to play in a just society, and we're all responsible for doing our part. You can't just sit back and, we got our leaders out there just fighting for justice, and you say, yeah, we need to do this, but you sitting back and not have no input or trying to help. We all have a role to play in having a just society. Now remember that God is depending on all of us to do our part for the sake of justice. We all have different and yet equally important responsibilities. Now, as you go about your life this week, pause and consider what God is calling you to do to advance justice. Think about that this week. You see, God's justice includes all people. God is an equal opportunity employer. He don't discriminate. So God's salvation is similar. Now, God desires that no one should perish. To procure justice and salvation for all, God enlisted a network of collaboration between divine and human agency. So, to this end, Jesus was born, ministered, and died, right? And he was raised on the third day, and now he sits with God, overseeing our justice efforts. I just implore you, spread the word. Thank you.